Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chen. We're just a couple guys talking about some stuff.
The stuff we're talking about today is this. Daniel, are you pronoun or connoun?
Ooh, depends. And that's what we're going to discuss.
It depends on the noun.
And it's like, why did you choose, why did we choose this title? And the reason is because it made me giggle.
Yes. Last week we were talking about future podcasts, and you came up with this within a 15-second period, and I thought, that's brilliant. Let's go with that.
I'm like, does it actually make sense? I don't know.
But here we are.
But here we are. It's kind of funny. So
we're talking funny title, very serious and applicable issue. What should Christians do when people have preferred pronouns that are opposite of their biological gender?
Right.
So when a biological man says, I want you to call me Sally, or I go by her.
Yeah, she, her,
right,
or they,
all that
them.
stuff.
Yeah.
How should Christians think about...
And then there's Z-zer, right?
Really?
Like XE.
Yeah, there's a bunch of... It's growing. It's a growing list.
Yeah.
So how should Christians interact with our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends who would identify as transgender and would prefer you call them a name and a pronoun that is different than the name or pronoun they were born with? So that's what we're going to talk today. We're going to solve this whole issue in a matter of about 30 minutes. So pretty easy, right? I mean, this is an easy one. Walk in the park.
I just keep thinking, I'm like, man, here we are, like, I think we have slowly ramped up into things that will get us canceled,
Oh, it's,
and here we are.
When I was growing up, I wanted to run for president one day. And that dream is long gone with about the second episode of this podcast. Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah.
I've no chance.
But in all honesty, would you really still want to be president after how the politics have gone in the past 20 years?
Yeah, I feel like you can't do that without being somewhat dirty, and I don't want to get dirty.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you're like a pastor.
Yeah, I want other people to get dirty for me, okay? So before we get to our topic this morning, we have to start with our Listener of the Month. And our Listener of the Month is our very own Justin Palmer. Justin and I have been friends for a number of years. He married one of Hillary's friends that she's had since growing up, Jory. And Justin's just been a faithful listener to this podcast for quite some time.
Yeah, he's just a cool guy, too.
Great guy. Serving our country currently in Navy Reserves training.
Yeah, so thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service, Justin. And for a long time, he regularly sends me screenshots of our topic and says, great podcast.
Yeah. I'm like, and he is like really into current events and all this stuff.
Yes.
I'm like, maybe we should have him on the podcast, get his thoughts on some stuff.
He should be a guest speaker here. Yeah, great guy. But I'm guessing he's not going to be listening to this one because he's kind of busy at Navy Reserves training.
Yeah.
So, Listener of the Month for a month that he probably won't be listening to us at all. But thank you, Justin, for listening. We appreciate you. So, on our topic today, are you pronoun or connoun? Why is this preferred pronoun stuff? Why is this a big deal?
Yeah, so I'm going to speak from, I guess, my viewpoint on this.
Which is the correct one, naturally.
Obviously. Yeah, I guess according to our culture, I'm right and you're all wrong, and we should all feel that way about each other, right? And
that's a good way to live.
Yeah, and
makes sense.
Just full transparency. It's not like I've spent a ton of time researching this or with people who this is a really passionate thing for them. Mm-hmm. It's just stuff I've read online and all this stuff. But from what I can gather, this is a big deal because your I guess what do they call it now? Like the transgenderism, identity. Is it just
gender identity?
Yeah, their gender identity. That word identity is super key here.
Right.
Even almost more than gender for this group of people that this is important to.
Mm-hmm.
That this is so rooted in their identity that it feels like a personal attack if you don't.
Right. To even question this gets to like you're challenging my very sense of self.
Right.
I mean, and if you're a transgender person listening, we're really glad that you're listening. And I don't want to assume your feelings or your motives or thoughts, but I would assume even us bringing this up may feel a little bit touchy because you think, why would you even challenge who I am?
Right.
This is who God made me to be. Why would you challenge that?
Yeah, and I think it's just really interesting because it's such a sensitive topic because everything seems so it feels so personal.
Yep.
For this group of people, and it feels like either a personal attack or we were just chatting about how somehow everything's a hate crime now.
Right.
And what we want to say is it's interesting what we pick and choose is like personal or not personal because I think a lot of people who would disagree with the transgender side would say, well, here's the science behind, here's the biology behind what we're talking about.
Sure.
And no, that you can't throw that out, But you talk about COVID stuff, then it's like the same people are all about the science, and
absolutely
some of the same people who are for the science, against the transgender movement, are against the science of the COVID stuff, and I won't get into it because I know there's a ton of nuance here.
Sure,
but it's just funny.
But in general, you're right.
It's funny what people pick and choose what is considered a personal attack and what's not. And I feel like oftentimes here, people's reaction that I've seen and interacted with take it as a personal attack, and that's why it's so important that we talk about this. And also because we work at a place where we really have like 2 full-time employees, and so we don't really deal with this much because it's me and you,
right?
But we do know, and we've heard this more and more, many of you who work a corporate job, this is something that really will affect your life and your job depending on how you choose to approach the subject.
Yeah, your very job could be at risk if you approach this in a certain way.
Yeah.
I think I've mentioned this before as the book of the month, The Rise and Fall of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman, maybe the best analysis of our current cultural moment and how we got there. We want to do a 3-part series on this at some point in time in the future. But just as a summary, he basically says, he starts the book by saying, I am a woman trapped in a man's body, quote. He said, my grandparents would have laughed at the ridiculousness of this statement.
Right.
But if you even question it today, you're considered a bigot.
Right.
How did we get here?
Right.
And he spends about 300 pages telling you how.
Right.
And he basically says there were like 3 phases that led us here and how we regarded the self. So the first was the psychologizing of the self. This is the kind of Descartes, I think, therefore I am.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And who I am started being centered on what I thought and felt about myself.
Right.
So we took a psychological vision of ourselves rather than one made in the image of God, subject to the commands of God. Second phase, Carl Trueman says, is the sexualizing of the self.
Right.
So Freud, everything we thought was about something to do with sex, something to do with sexual repression. And this is eventually where we get the sexual revolution in the 60s. And then he said the third phase, though, which we're kind of at right now, is the politicization of the self.
Yeah.
Which is, it's not enough for me to feel a certain way. You, random stranger, must affirm the way that I live. And if you don't affirm the way that I live, you're a bigot and you're worthy of hate crimes. Everything is political right now. Nothing is just personal, right? So those kind of 3 phases are how we've gotten to where we are. And this is rooted in this, right? This is no longer like a you do you, let me do me kind of thing.
Right.
It's, I'm going to choose this identity that's contrary to the biology that I was born with.
Right.
And you must affirm me. Right. That's kind of where we are. And Christians are left in a bit of a confusing struggle to decide how to deal with this.
Right. And
this is probably oversimplistic and for those who are nuanced people, you're probably not going to like the titles that I've chosen because you're going to argue with my use of the word grace here. But just give me some grace in how I'm breaking this down.
Yeah, and so even before you get there, I just want to say, we don't mean for this to be a personal attack on anyone, right? We just want to talk about. I just think where our culture is at now is that we always think we're at the pinnacle of like creation, that we're so much smarter than everyone else, and who I decide to be is because I am like a special snowflake that has decided that no one else is like me, and what I decide is correct because I'm. No one says this out loud, but we all believe we're so smart and we figured it out. I think the Descartes thing is so funny because I'm like, look, Christians say, I am who I am because of who God or who Jesus says I am.
Sure.
But, if you're not a Christian, you're still letting someone dictate who you are.
Absolutely.
If it's not Jesus, it could be Descartes or, one of these other psychologists we're all a product of our culture. And I don't think people realize that. It's not like we've gotten even to these movements, not because all of a sudden we have woke up with special revelation about, the world woke up with special revelation about the like transgender community that no one else thought of. It's like, no, it's taken decades and hundreds of years. You can just trace back that this is a product of things that happened 100 years ago.
No, I'm glad you brought that up as a little tangent. Tim Keller has this great illustration on that. He says, okay, let's assume 1,000 years ago, an Anglo-Saxon warrior is going through Britain, and he has two deep feelings in his heart. One is that he likes to kill people, and the second feeling is that he is attracted to men. What is his culture going to tell him? You are the first one. You're a warrior.
Right.
Kill people. That's what's honorable. Second one, make sure you repress that. Don't feel that. That's bad.
Right.
Fast forward 1,000 years. A modern person in New York City is walking down the street and he feels two things. He would like to kill people and he's attracted to other men. What does his culture tell him? Number one is very bad. Number two is very good. So we shouldn't pretend like we're not influenced by our culture.
Right.
Right. And we shouldn't pretend like this whole issue is not largely influenced by what the kind of cultural elites are leading our culture to think.
Right.
So we should be aware of the influences that are influencing how we even think about ourselves.
And even how we've gone like full circle, like pre-Enlightenment, everything was like external to you, right? You knew truth was external to you, right? And then post-Enlightenment, everything is internal. What you decide, right? That's how we got to postmodernism is from post-Enlightenment thinking.
Right.
But we've gone full circle again because now it's not enough for you to just internally believe what you are. You need to now externally be validated.
Right.
What your internal feelings, and you've kind of like, what people don't realize is that we're not necessarily like moving forward. Our technology is moving forward, but as like a human race, we're just going in circles.
Going in circles. Yep.
Which I think is so interesting and so interesting to think about. Whether you're a Christian listening to this, which probably you are because of this podcast, but if you're part of the LGBT community, once again, we're thankful you're listening.
Absolutely.
We hope you don't take this as an attack, but to think about holistically this thing that it's not like, I think progress is this word that we hear all the time today, right?
Yep.
We're just going in circles.
Absolutely. 100%. So in general, I think Christians, when it comes to how should we interact with our transgender friends, colleagues, coworkers, neighbors, when it comes to gender identity and pronouns specifically,
right?
Preferred pronouns, there tends to be the grace answer and the truth answer. Broadly speaking, the grace answer, I would say, tends to say you should use that person's preferred pronouns because I want to build a long-term relationship with them for gospel sharing. Right? So if it's a man, a biologically born man that wants to go by her, she, her, with a female name, you should use the female name, you should use the female pronouns, because if you're not willing to do that, they're going to take that as a personal attack, and you're never going to get into their lives,
Yeah.
to build a relationship, to be able to share the gospel. That's kind of one side. The other side, I'll call the truth answer, is you should love that individual enough to tell them the truth.
Right.
And to call a biological male her or she is a lie.
Right.
And you are not treating them with dignity. You're actually lying to them and helping further their delusion.
Yep.
So you should tell the truth. You should love them enough to tell them the truth. You should love the gospel enough to speak the truth in love, even if it costs you the relationship, even if it costs you the job. Grace and truth, or you could call it soft and hard, or you could call it whatever you want to, long-term approach, short-term approach, whatever way you want to call it. I've noticed those tend to be the two camps. And the irony is, I think each person in those camps thinks that this is the way Christians should address this issue.
Yes.
And if you disagree with them, you're wrong. You're
Yeah.
taking the wrong approach.
Yeah. And once again, we're talking from two Christians from a Christian's perspective.
Yes.
Right. And I think I think it might be helpful to say where I've seen this like from a almost famous Christian perspective is you have like J.D. Greear, who's more on the grace side.
Yep, he's going to say, yep, I want to build a long-term relationship. I'll use the preferred pronoun.
And then you have maybe MacArthur. I don't know for sure, but I think he's on the truth side.
I think we can
I've
say
heard
for sure.
yeah. I just don't want to like put words in his mouth if he didn't say it. But
Yeah.
I'm
Pretty
trying
confident.
to remember.
Yes.
Yeah, that I think he. And what you see is from the larger evangelical like community, especially on Twitter, is no matter which side you fall on, you're going to get crushed by the other side.
You can get crushed by the other side.
And I think that's unfair.
Yep.
Because I think the heart of both of these is the same. We
wanna-
want to love these people and have them hear the gospel so that they can be saved.
Yes.
I think both of them take their own approaches for the same reason.
Right.
That have come up with different conclusions on how to do it.
Right. So we want to kind of just talk about the pros and cons of each, and then we're going to kind of share where we land personally. And just before we start, I just want to make clear, when I say grace, I don't mean people affirming transgenderism as a lifestyle.
Right.
Or affirming homosexual activity as a lifestyle. I mean their approach to preferred pronouns.
Right.
So I think really the more I think about it, just to nuance this, because I think terms do matter, I don't want people to confuse the grace of God with a particular approach to this.
Right.
So it might be better to call it the long-term relationship perspective,
Right.
and the short-term truth perspective.
Yeah. That's
So maybe that's a little more clear rather than grace and truth. I was trying to be smart with my little John 1 reference, but I think it could be confusing. So let's talk about the pros of the long-term relationship view. So this is the person who believes the biblical sexual ethic, that we're either made male or female, and that marriage should be between one man and one woman. But they would say, I'm going to play the long-term relationship game. I'm going to use their preferred pronouns. I'm going to use their preferred name with the hope of building trust, building a relationship to share the gospel. What's the good part about this view?
Yeah, I think the good part, I mean, it's kind of what you said. It helps build trust in a relationship. You know, I always say you can speak or you can shout or you can preach, but do you have a platform where people are actually listening?
Yep.
Or you just kind of yelling into the air, right? Because I think it's like anything else. For example, we, are part of the Southern Baptist Convention. Where, yeah, I know. Even in that, I'm like, should I tell you guys that? But you know,
The secret's out.
but drinking is one of those taboo things, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, even if you're against drinking, right, is the best way to share the gospel with someone who likes to hang out in bars just by like berating them for drinking as like the first thing you do,
Right.
Or is it like maybe there is a benefit where, I personally believe that, the Bible prohibits drunkenness, but not just having a drink.
Right.
Like, I think this view would be, in this analogy, it's like you go and have a beer at the bar with your buddy who that's the only place he'll meet you.
Sure.
So that you can have a relationship and build a relationship there.
Or as they said to me in my Southern Baptist seminary, you go to the bar and order a Diet Coke.
But you get, I'm just using an analogy here,
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah, you get what I'm saying is that you're just trying to build a bridge, right? And I know even the drinking thing is not a one-to-one perfect analogy. There's nuances to whatever. I'm just saying you're building a bridge.
Man, maybe that's what we should call it, the bridge building view.
Yeah, the bridge building.
I mean, I do think I think the pro of this view is like, look, this shouldn't be where your identity is rooted, but that's the way it is in our current culture.
Right.
So if I reject what you perceive to be as something central to your own identity, it's game off on relationship. I'm never going to have a platform to speak into your life.
Right.
So for the sake of the gospel, I'll play your game for a little bit.
Right.
I'll buy in enough to where I'm going to gain a ground for listening.
Right.
I mean, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. And another way to view it maybe is if you are on a mission trip in Mexico, you're not going to share the gospel in English. You're going to share the gospel in Spanish.
Yeah.
In some ways, you're just trying to speak their language.
Yep.
Right? And I think there is like a nuanced view where you can hold this long-term relationship, bridge building view, whatever we'll call it, where it's like you're not even in the usage, because I think the argument against from like the short-term truth view is that you're affirming the lifestyle. And I think I don't think it's that black and white.
Sure.
I think there is partially where, like, I'm just speaking the language of the culture.
Right.
So that I can, we always say the gospel never changes, but the package you put it in can.
Sure.
Right. And that's this contextualization. And I think this can be part of a contextualization into sharing the gospel and wanting them to come to faith.
Mm-hmm. The other pro is that you don't get fired.
Yeah, we got to talk about that a little bit, right?
I mean, right, some of you listening, if you don't buy into this, you could get fired for discrimination. I mean,
right.
That's just a real thing.
Right.
The other interesting thing is this whole conversation assumes
yeah,
about the person.
Right.
So maybe you don't. I mean, maybe you meet a person who is already transitioned. You have no idea they were born as a biological male. They were presented to you from the beginning as a female.
Right.
And you're not aware.
Right.
I mean, that's very possible.
Right.
To me, that actually makes it a lot easier because
we
don't tell people to like pull down their pants to verify things.
Man, I sure hope we don't get to that point in our culture.
So, I mean, I think it is. I think the conversation does become a little more black and white if you're not aware a person has transitioned.
Right.
You just call them what they ask you to be called, and you're not aware of. But if you're there in the transition period,
right,
that becomes harder.
Yeah. What do you do with a coworker or a friend that tells you I'm transitioning, and the first 2 years you knew them, they were
Nathan, and now they want to be Nancy.
Yeah.
What about cons of this view?
I think the con here is like anything else where you start to make any concessions, where do you stop?
Right.
Right. I think I won't say it's a slippery slope, but there is a slope. Mm-hmm. And unless you realize there is a slope, sometimes you can find yourself in a place where you're like, you start as you're not affirming. And I think the danger could be down the road, you start to make tiny, tiny concessions. And then all of a sudden you're outside the biblical view, the biblical framework for sexuality.
Right. I think a pretty big con here is, we talked about in Romans chapter 10, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. Well, part of that confession of Jesus being Lord involves you not being Lord. Right. Which means he has the right to define you. That's like gospel 101, right?
Right.
Is Jesus has rights over you. And
ooh, that is not a popular American concept.
And so
but it is a truthful biblical one.
Right. So a struggle here, if you're going to go this route, this long-term relationship view, is if you're going to be faithful to the gospel, at some point in that relationship,
you will have to challenge.
You will have to say, I've been calling you her and she and Nancy, but Nathan, you are made in God's image as a man. And part of trusting in Christ involves you submitting to his lordship, which involves the gender he created you as.
Yeah.
So it's almost like that's a necessary conversation, and that's going to be a necessary conversation to that person's conversion,
Right.
and to their well-being. We believe God created us for our good. So he didn't create us to torture us. He created us male and female for our own good.
Right.
So it's for this person's good that he or she live in accordance with the gender that he or she was born with. So are you kind of kicking the can down the road
Yeah.
in creating an even more hurtful and awkward conversation to be like, yeah, I've actually been kind of lying to you in a sense this whole time.
Right.
I actually don't believe you're a she.
Yeah. And I would say, it's funny. I think I fall more on the like even on the Myers-Briggs, you're a thinker, I'm a feeler,
Sure.
I think what I would struggle with is just never bringing it up. Oh, man, I'm too far down. We're too far in. This is going to be too awkward.
I've been calling him or her for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I think it's funny. I guess those are the two cons, right? It's like you either have to have this hard conversation that could be even more hurtful, or you just never have it. You just kind of let it go.
Yep.
And that's not doing any favors either.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like the evangelism thing in a relationship. Go early in the relationship.
Yeah.
Let them know you are a Christian quickly, minimum.
Right.
You don't have to share your testimony of your God. Make sure they know you're a Christian soon in the relationship, so that you don't get like a long time into it and you're like trying to share your faith and you're like, this is
what's
so
happening?
awkward. Like, what's going on here? Okay, so that's kind of the long-term relationship view. Short-term truth view is, look, I'm going to love you enough to tell you the truth from the very beginning, even if it cost me.
Right.
And that means if you were born as a man, I'm going to call you he, him, and I'm going to use your name given at birth. What are the pros here?
Yeah, the pros are that you are holding to biblical truth. I think we've kind of explained it in the names, but I mean, really though, like you don't have to bend your conscience at all here with this view. And you believe that the truth is more important. I think these people on this view would say, truth is more important than feelings.
Right.
Right. And I think that's valid.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's just funny. I think people hold to their convictions. That's why I'll leave it. I was going to get into cons, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, I think the benefit here is it brings you to a conversation about the gospel immediately.
Right.
So it doesn't set you up for that awkward 2 years in. Oh yeah, something I've been wanting to tell you about. From the beginning, you're being honest about your faith. You're being honest about how you believe God created us male and female, and that's a good thing.
Right.
I think the haters on this view, or the people that disagree with this view, would say this is a very abrasive way to start the relationship. But I think it can be done in a very kind, sensitive, caring way.
I agree.
So I think you can be very firm on truth and do it in a respectful, kind demeanor.
Right.
And how you approach this person in this conversation that shows that you love them.
Right.
And I think you emphasize, man, I really respect you. I love you, so much so that this is very awkward for me. I don't want to do this. I don't want to step on your toes. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I do want to love you enough to tell you the truth.
Right.
So I think it can create very positive conversations. It's going to take maybe some rehearsal with some friends to plan out how you're going to say it.
Right.
What about the cons of this view?
Yeah, I think the cons are I guess I just haven't seen this done very well in the way you just described it from most people. I just think most people who hold this view go in guns blazing. And I guess if you're just trying to long-term share the gospel with someone, not even gospel, holding a metaphorical gun out when you meet anyone for the first time is not the best way to build relationships. And I'd say that's probably the biggest con.
One of our members has a neighbor who is transitioning, and I was talking to her about this, and the way she said she wanted to go about it was phenomenal to me. I think that the way she was saying is like, if this comes up, I'm going to tell this person like, hey, you know, I really care about you, and like I know that you're going through this transition right now, and I know that you now want to be called this name, and I just want to just as lovingly as possible be upfront with you about why I don't feel like I can call you that name. And it's because I believe God created us male and female, and he loved us enough in our sin to send Jesus to come and die for us.
Yeah.
And I understand you don't believe like I do.
Right.
And I respect that. I just want you to know where I'm coming from and why I can't call you this new name.
Right.
But would you feel okay if we compromised and I just gave you the nickname of that first initial? Could I just call you T?
Huh.
And I thought, man, that's like, it was kind, it was upfront, it was loving, and there was an effort to make some compromise.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, the normal way you hear about this,
Yes,
is the Ben Shapiro episode on that thing where he's like talking to that transgender woman, and he is like, if you call me he one more time, I'm going to punch you. Like that. That's what we're used to in this conversation.
Yeah, and I would say, and maybe it's just because I've been, you know, reading the news too much, but because I'm sure there's many people who do the short-term truth view like that. And I'm like, if that's you, I'm like, there's not a lot of cons, except for maybe like getting fired at your job, like we talked about. That's a con.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what would you say to this? If you were at your workplace, how would you handle this?
I mean, yeah, the con here, right, is you really might be fired.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked to some of our members who work in corporate America who this would fall under the like hate speech category.
Yeah.
And would be a fireable offense. So I think that's a legitimate con, and something, if I'm to be honest, I can't answer truthfully because I'm just not there. Like I have no. My job would be at risk if I went the other way on this issue.
Right.
Right. So I have no like.
Concept
I don't know what
it.
that feels like to be like. I got a wife and kids, and it's my job to put the food on the table.
Yeah.
And I could be putting that at risk with this. So I actually have a lot of sympathy toward our brothers and sisters in Christ. And in my perspective, I have a pretty big latitude for like how you think through this in the workplace. I'll tell you where I tend to land personally on this in general. If I am not aware, I'm just going to call you whatever you say, right? I'm not inspecting people's gender, right? Like I said. But if I'm aware, if I know that you were born a certain sex and you are now going by a different sex, I'm likely to have the conversation in the beginning potentially, or maybe more likely, I would be quicker to consider using your preferred name than I would your preferred pronoun.
Right.
And my reasoning for that is people go by all sorts of names, middle names, nicknames that aren't like given at birth. I know the pushback to that would be, well, certain names are clearly masculine and certain names are clearly feminine. And so you're still basically doing the pronoun thing. And I respect that feedback.
Right.
That tends to be, I would probably lean toward giving you the name, but not the pronoun.
Yeah.
And maybe lean toward, I'd probably be closer to the short-term truth view of I'd probably want to get it out in the beginning and be honest and kind and respectful about it.
Yeah.
What about you?
You know, I would say, I think your view of is the Bible the Word of God and what does the Bible say about human sexuality is like you're on kind of on the primary level, right? Mm-hmm. But like the usage of pronouns is like this is a tertiary issue here, you know, or less. And I would say where I personally land, my personality tends me towards the long-term relationship view, not just on transgenderism, just with anyone.
Sure.
So I tend towards that. And But I think there is a middle ground, because what you said about like the being upfront with the truth upfront in a really nice way is me too.
Yeah.
And I think you've probably seen me do it, where so maybe there's a middle ground here that you can land on that I think is really good, where you're building the relationship and expressing care and love and not bending on your convictions and the truth. To me, I'm just like, the most important thing if I'm sharing the gospel with someone is that they believe in a historical Jesus who lived and died and rose.
Yep.
And so in some ways, like if it's like a really sensitive topic, I'm like, I kind of try to just avoid it for a little bit, and just get the basics of Christianity down first, which is Jesus died for your sin and rose, defeating death, and restored you to God.
Yep.
That's what I want to talk about when we talk about religion. Like, what I explain to people is that's 1 + 1.
Yeah.
Your view of like transgenderism is like algebra.
Yeah.
But if we don't agree 1 + 1 = 2, I can promise you we're gonna get different answers when we get to the algebra stuff, right? Yep. But where I would land is, probably in the middle. I think there's benefits of both. I think depending on my relationship with someone, it kind of flip-flops which one I use. I would also say a lot of it has to do with your own personal convictions, right? If you're at work, what is God? What's the Holy Spirit convicting you of? Would it be sinful for you to call them reject your conscience on this?
Great counsel. Yep.
For you to call them by a different pronoun, because if it is, you need to count the cost. You need to count the cost of following Jesus.
Yep.
And that cost might be your job sometimes.
Yeah.
And I say that not with a light heart.
Yeah.
But it's something you do need to wrestle through. But if God doesn't give you the conscience, like there are many Bible-believing Christians, we've stated earlier, who actually think the long-term relationship view is the
biblical view.
The biblical view.
Yeah.
And if that's you, then you just I think a lot of it will have to do with your conscience.
Yeah.
Because I think it would be hard to work in a job that you're constantly feeling like you're in sin.
Yes.
Because you have to buck up against your conscience.
Great
right?
counsel.
And so that's what I would say. I don't think it's we talk about here. I don't live in the black and white usually anyways, and this is a very great answer, but I think it's a nuanced answer based on what the Spirit is convicting you of.
No, that's a great point. The author Ron Dreer, who did the Benedict option, and he also published one, Live Not by Lies, talking about how to live in this age. He actually thinks that Christians need to start thinking about maybe other professions to go into that are maybe more manual labor and less of this kind of thing, because his issue is, over the long term, this is not going away. And if you have to bend your conscience on this issue, it's not a job you should be in. So and that may be a long-term answer for some people, is maybe some Christians need to rethink the profession that they're in.
Right.
That's scary to think about. Two thoughts I had. One, Tim Keller gives a great analogy that every non-Christian is basically living in a suit that's too small for them.
Right.
They're wearing a suit that's too small, and eventually it's going to rip.
Right.
And when it rips, not if, when it rips, we want to be there with the gospel to show how the suit can fit better.
Right.
How the right fitting suit can be good for you.
Right.
And I think with this issue, dealing with our transgender friends, when we're sharing the gospel, we need to be like ready and thoughtful. Their suit's going to rip, and we need to be able to be there with gospel solutions for how a new suit can fit better.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be like cognizant of that and ready of that. The other thing that I think we need to be aware of is we need to be thoughtful on how is the gospel good news for my transgender friend. And where I've kind of come to is transgenderism really is salvation by works. And the gospel is good news that you're freed from the works. So the works of transgenderism are you're having to constantly make changes to your physical appearance to try to contradict a biological reality to make your biology kind of fit with your subjective view of yourself.
Right.
That's exhausting.
Yeah.
So I think when we're thinking about how's the gospel good news for our transgender friends, it's Jesus saying, "Come to me, all who are heavy and heavy burdened and weary, and I'll give you rest." Jesus offers for us to lay our salvation by works down and pick up grace and pick up the yoke and the burden of grace, which is that we're made right with God by what He's done, not by what we do. And you don't have to live this life of constantly trying to redefine yourself.
Right.
You can rest in who He's defined you to be. And so I think that kind of perspective of thinking about how is the gospel specifically good news for my transgender friend can be really helpful in how we approach and talk to them.
Yeah.
So we would love to hear your thoughts on this issue. We don't expect it to be a simple one. Yeah. Any kind of closing thoughts?
Yeah, I'm like, maybe we should, I guess we'll hit it when we do that book. But
yeah.
I'm like, I think there's just so much more to be said. Here,
there is.
And because we're talking about how to approach those who are transgender from a Christian perspective, but
right.
we didn't really even get to cover the actual biblical sexual ethic here on like covering the whole idea of transgenderism and where does it come from and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here thinking that'd probably be helpful,
yep.
to do a later podcast on that. So, but hopefully this was helpful for you guys.
Yeah. So we'll do that series in the future, but until then, thanks for listening. Have a great week.